My name is Sarah. I'm 28 years old, and this is the story of how I was betrayed by the one person I trusted the most, my own family. You won't believe what happened next, but I promise you, this story will change how you see family forever. Have you ever been betrayed by someone close to you? Someone who was supposed to protect you but instead became your worst nightmare? If you've ever dealt with a toxic family member, hit that like button because you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about how one moment can destroy your entire life and force you to rebuild from nothing. It was supposed to be a normal family gathering, just like any other birthday party we'd had over the years. I remember walking into that house, feeling nervous but hopeful that maybe things had changed between us. My brother Michael was turning 30, and my mother had begged me for months to come back home for the celebration. I hadn't seen my family in almost 2 years, and honestly, I was hoping that time and distance might have softened their hearts. But as I stepped through that front door, I had no idea that I would never walk out the same person again. The thing about family is that we trust them with our lives, don't we? We believe that no matter what happens, our blood relatives will always have our back. We grow up thinking that home is the safest place in the world, where love is unconditional and protection is guaranteed. But what happens when the very people who are supposed to love you become the ones who hurt you the most? What happens when your own brother, the person who shared your childhood, becomes the architect of your worst nightmare? Before I tell you what happened that day, I need you to understand something important about my family dynamic. This wasn't the first time Michael had hurt me. It was just the worst time. For years, I had endured his cruel pranks and manipulative behavior, always hoping that one day he would change. My brother was about to cross a line that would destroy everything, but I had no idea what was coming. The signs were all there, but I was too hopeful, too trusting to see the danger that was waiting for me. Growing up in the Johnson household looked perfect from the outside, but behind closed doors, it was a completely different story. My father, Thomas, was a military man who believed that emotions were a sign of weakness, especially in women. He had this twisted philosophy that crying or showing pain would make us soft and unprepared for the real world. My mother, Linda, never stood up to him. Instead, she became his faithful supporter, always agreeing with his harsh methods and dismissing any concerns I had. Together, they created a home environment where Michael could do no wrong, and I was always the problem child who needed to toughen up. The favoritism in our house was so obvious that even neighbors started to notice when we were kids. Michael was the golden child who could never do anything wrong, while I was the scapegoat who got blamed for everything. If Michael broke something, somehow it became my fault for provoking him or being in the way. When I tried to defend myself or tell my parents about his mean behavior, they would always say I was being dramatic or making things up. This pattern continued for years, slowly eating away at my self-worth and making me question my own reality. What hurt the most wasn't just Michael's cruelty. It was watching my parents enable and encourage his behavior. Every time he pulled a prank on me, they would laugh it off as boys being boys. When I would come to them with tears in my eyes, begging them to make him stop, my father would tell me to stop being so sensitive. My mother would say things like, "He's just playing with you," or "You need to learn to take a joke." They treated his psychological torture as harmless fun, never considering the long-term damage they were causing to my mental health. By the time I reached high school, I had learned to keep my mouth shut and endure whatever Michael threw at me. I became an expert at hiding my emotions, at pretending that his cruel words and actions didn't affect me. But deep inside, I was building walls around my heart, protecting myself from the family that was supposed to love me unconditionally. I started making plans to leave as soon as I turned 18, dreaming of a life where I wouldn't have to walk on eggshells or fear my own brother's next move. Little did I know that his worst prank was still to come, and it would change everything forever. Michael's cruelty wasn't just occasional teasing, it was systematic torture disguised as harmless fun. When we were kids, he would lock me in dark closets for hours, knowing I was terrified of small spaces. He would tell me scary stories about monsters under my bed, then hide in my room at night to make scratching noises on the walls. His pranks always had this twisted psychological element that went way beyond normal sibling rivalry. While other brothers might put a frog in their sister's bed, Michael would create elaborate schemes designed to break me mentally and emotionally. As we got older, his methods became more sophisticated and cruel. He would steal my diary and read my most private thoughts out loud to his friends, laughing at my teenage insecurities. During family dinners, he would make subtle comments designed to trigger my anxiety, then act innocent when I reacted. He had this gift for finding my deepest fears and using them against me in ways that looked innocent to our parents. The worst part was how he would comfort me afterward, pretending to be the caring big brother, which made me question if I was just being too sensitive. The physical pranks were just as bad as the psychological ones, maybe even worse. Michael once convinced me to climb a tree, then shook it violently until I fell and broke my wrist. When I told my parents what happened, he said I slipped on my own, and they believed him over me. Another time, he put hot sauce in my eye drops, causing me excruciating pain and temporary vision problems. Each incident was carefully planned to look like an accident or my own fault, making it impossible for me to get help or support from our parents. What made Michael's abuse so effective was his ability to manipulate everyone around him. He was charming, funny, and popular. The kind of person everyone wanted to be friends with. Teachers loved him, neighbors adored him, and our extended family thought he was perfect. This made it impossible for anyone to believe that he was capable of the cruelty he showed me behind closed doors. I started to wonder if I was crazy, if maybe I really was just too sensitive or dramatic like everyone said. But deep down, I knew the truth. Michael enjoyed hurting me, and he was very good at it. The day I turned 18 was the day I started planning my escape from the toxic prison I called home. I had been accepted to a teaching program at a university 3 states away, and I knew this was my chance to finally break free. My parents didn't understand why I wanted to go so far away for school when there were perfectly good colleges nearby. They kept asking what was wrong with me, why I didn't want to stay close to family like Michael had. But I couldn't explain to them that being near my family felt like suffocating, that every day in that house was another day of walking on eggshells and fearing my brother's next move. Moving away was like learning to breathe again for the first time in years. I threw myself into my studies, discovering that I had a natural talent for teaching and connecting with children. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who saw value in me, who appreciated my kindness and sensitivity instead of mocking it. I made real friends, people who supported me and believed in me. I started going to therapy, slowly unpacking years of emotional damage, and learning that the way my family treated me wasn't normal or acceptable. Building my new life meant keeping my old life at a distance, and that included limiting contact with my family. I would call home maybe once a month, keeping the conversations short and surface level. When my parents asked when I was coming to visit, I always had excuses. Work was busy, I couldn't afford the trip, I had other commitments. The truth was that even thinking about going back to that house made my anxiety spike. I had worked too hard to heal and rebuild myself to risk going backward. My therapist helped me understand that protecting myself from toxic people wasn't selfish. It was necessary for my mental health. Years passed, and I built a successful career as an elementary school teacher. I loved working with children because they were honest and pure in ways that my family never was. I found purpose in protecting kids who reminded me of my younger self, the quiet ones, the sensitive ones, the ones who seemed to carry heavy burdens. My colleagues respected me, my students adored me, and I was finally living the peaceful life I had always dreamed of. But peace never lasts forever, and eventually, the past would come knocking at my door in the worst possible way. The phone calls from my mother started in February, 3 months before Michael's 30th birthday party. At first, they were casual mentions about planning something special for his milestone birthday. Then they became more frequent, more insistent, filled with guilt trips about how I never came home anymore. She would say things like, "Michael really misses you," and "It would mean so much to him if you were there." If you've ever had family members try to guilt trip you into toxic situations, you know exactly how this feels. Drop a comment and let me know your experience. Every conversation ended with her begging me to reconsider, promising that things would be different this time. My mother's manipulation tactics became more desperate as the party date approached. She started calling me at work, crying about how divided our family had become. She told me that Michael had changed, that he was more mature now, that he often asked about me and regretted how things were between us. She painted this picture of a reformed brother who was ready to make amends and rebuild our relationship. Looking back, I realized she was probably lying about most of it. But at the time, her words planted a seed of hope in my heart that maybe, just maybe, things really could be different. Against my better judgment and my therapist's advice, I finally agreed to attend the party. I told myself it would just be one weekend, that I could handle anything for 48 hours. I made conditions. I would stay in a hotel, not in the family home, and I would only stay for the party itself, not the entire weekend. My mother agreed to everything, probably because she was so relieved that I was coming at all. I booked my flight with sweaty palms, already regretting my decision, but feeling obligated to give my family one more chance. The 3-hour flight felt like the longest journey of my life. I kept changing my mind about whether I should turn around at the airport and go home. My anxiety was through the roof, and I had to remind myself to breathe as the plane descended into my hometown. I hadn't been back in almost 3 years, and everything looked smaller and more depressing than I remembered. As the taxi pulled up to my hotel, I could see my childhood home just 2 blocks away, and my stomach dropped with dread. I had no idea that I was walking into the worst day of my entire life. The party was already in full swing when I arrived at my parents' house that Saturday afternoon. The backyard was decorated with balloons and streamers, and about 30 people were scattered around the pool area, laughing and drinking. Michael spotted me immediately and walked over with that same fake smile I remembered from childhood. He gave me a big hug and said all the right things about how happy he was to see me, how much he'd missed me, but I could see something dark flickering in his eyes, that familiar look that told me he was planning something. My stomach churned with the old familiar fear, but I pushed it down and tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. For the first hour, Michael was actually behaving normally, almost pleasantly. He introduced me to his friends, included me in conversations, and even complimented my career success. I started to relax a little, thinking that maybe my mother had been right about him changing. But then I noticed the little things. How he would make subtle digs at me when no one else was listening. How he would accidentally bump into me near the pool. How his friends would smirk when he made certain comments. The old patterns were still there, just better hidden and more sophisticated than they used to be. As the afternoon wore on, Michael's behavior became more aggressive and obvious. He started telling embarrassing stories about my childhood, painting me as the weird, antisocial sister who couldn't take a joke. He brought up old incidents that I had tried so hard to forget, describing them as hilarious memories while I stood there feeling humiliated. His friends laughed along, not realizing how cruel he was being, while my parents just smiled and nodded like this was all perfectly normal family banter. I could feel my face burning with shame and anger, but I didn't want to cause a scene at his party. The breaking point came when Michael decided to reenact one of his old pranks for his friends' entertainment. He started talking about how I used to be so clumsy as a kid, always falling down and getting hurt. He said I was probably still just as unsteady on my feet, and wouldn't it be funny if I ended up in the pool fully clothed like old times? That's when I knew I had to leave. The predatory look in his eyes was unmistakable, and every instinct I had was screaming danger. I started making my excuses, saying I wasn't feeling well and needed to get back to my hotel, but Michael wasn't going to let me escape that easily. As I tried to walk toward the house to say goodbye to my parents, Michael blocked my path with a cruel smile. He insisted I couldn't leave yet because he had a special surprise planned for me, something that would remind me of the good old days. His friends gathered around, thinking this was all harmless fun, while I felt trapped and increasingly panicked. I could see my parents watching from across the yard, smiling and nodding as if this was perfectly normal family interaction. Michael kept moving closer, herding me toward the pool area where the concrete was slick from people getting in and out of the water all day. What I didn't know at the time was that Michael had been planning this moment for hours, maybe even days. While I was inside using the bathroom earlier, he had deliberately poured cooking oil on the pool deck, creating an invisible trap that would look like an accident to everyone watching. He had positioned himself perfectly so that when I tried to step around him, I would have no choice but to walk directly into his carefully laid trap. The oil was colorless and odorless, spread thin enough that it just looked like water from the pool, but thick enough to make the surface as slippery as ice. I remember taking that fateful step backward, trying to get away from Michael and his menacing smile. My foot hit the oiled concrete, and instantly I knew something was wrong. There was no traction, no stability, nothing to stop my body from sliding. Time seemed to slow down as I felt myself falling backward, my arms windmilling frantically as I tried to regain my balance. The last thing I remember clearly was seeing Michael's face, and instead of concern or shock, there was pure satisfaction in his eyes. He wasn't trying to help me or catch me. He was enjoying watching me fall. The impact when I hit the concrete was unlike anything I had ever experienced. There was a sickening crack that seemed to echo through my entire body, followed by the most intense pain I had ever felt shooting up my spine. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even scream for help at first. I just lay there on the cold, wet concrete, staring up at the sky and feeling absolutely nothing below my waist. The chatter and laughter from the party seemed to fade into background noise as I realized something was terribly, permanently wrong. This wasn't just a fall. This was the moment my entire life changed forever. The first words I heard after hitting the concrete weren't expressions of concern or offers to help. They were complaints about how I had ruined the party atmosphere. My father rushed over, but instead of checking if I was okay, he started yelling at me for being so clumsy and dramatic. He kept saying things like, "Get up, Sarah, stop making a scene," and "This is exactly the kind of attention-seeking behavior we've had to deal with for years." My mother joined in, more worried about what the guests would think than about her daughter lying motionless on the ground. The pain in my spine was excruciating, but the pain of their rejection and dismissal was almost worse. When I tried to explain that I couldn't feel my legs, that something was seriously wrong, my father's response was to tell me to walk it off. He had used this phrase my entire childhood whenever I got hurt, as if physical pain was just a matter of mental weakness. My mother started apologizing to the party guests for the disruption, saying I had always been dramatic and accident-prone. She actually asked people to continue enjoying themselves and ignore the situation, as if I was just throwing a tantrum on the ground for attention. The guests looked uncomfortable, but none of them spoke up or suggested calling for medical help. My parents' refusal to take my injuries seriously went beyond simple denial. It was active negligence that could have cost me my life. They insisted I was fine and just needed to calm down and stop being hysterical. My father even tried to pull me up by my arms, which sent waves of agony through my already damaged spine. When I screamed in pain, he accused me of being overdramatic and said I was embarrassing the family in front of all the guests. My mother suggested I go lie down inside the house until I felt better, completely ignoring the fact that I couldn't move my legs at all. The most heartbreaking part was realizing that even in this moment of crisis, my family's priority was protecting Michael and maintaining their perfect family image. They were more concerned about the party continuing smoothly than about getting me medical attention. My father kept saying it was my own fault for not watching where I was walking, while my mother worried about what people would say about us. As I lay there in agony, unable to move and terrified about what was happening to my body, I understood with crystal clarity that my family would never change. They would always choose Michael over me, appearances over truth, and their own comfort over my well-being. While everyone else at the party was either dismissing my injury or looking uncomfortable, Michael's reaction was the most disturbing of all. Instead of showing even a hint of remorse or concern, he actually seemed pleased with what had happened. He stood there watching me writhe in pain on the concrete, and I swear I could see satisfaction in his eyes. When some of the guests started suggesting we should call an ambulance, Michael was the first to wave them off, saying I was just being dramatic like always. He told everyone that I had always been clumsy and that this kind of thing happened all the time when we were kids. What made Michael's behavior even more sickening was how he started making jokes about my condition. He told his friends that I was probably just trying to get attention because I couldn't handle not being the center of focus at his birthday party. He actually laughed and said something about how I always found a way to make everything about me. When I begged him to help me, to please just call for medical assistance, he rolled his eyes and said I needed to stop being so dramatic. His complete lack of empathy was shocking even to some of his own friends, who started looking at him strangely. The worst part was when Michael decided to take his cruelty one step further by trying to prove I was faking my injury. He picked up the garden hose and started spraying cold water on my legs, saying that if I could really feel nothing, this shouldn't bother me. When I didn't react to the water because I genuinely couldn't feel it, he seemed momentarily confused, but then claimed I was just committed to my act. He kept insisting to everyone that I was pretending, that I had always been manipulative and attention-seeking. His refusal to acknowledge the severity of what he had caused was beyond heartless. It was pure evil. As the minutes ticked by and I remained motionless on the ground, even Michael's most loyal friends started to realize that something was seriously wrong. But instead of showing any remorse or taking responsibility, Michael doubled down on his denial and blame. He started telling people that if I was really hurt, it was my own fault for not being more careful. He claimed he had nothing to do with my fall, that I had just slipped because I wasn't paying attention. Watching him lie so effortlessly while I lay there paralyzed was a wake-up call about the kind of person he really was. Not just cruel, but genuinely dangerous and completely without conscience. Thank God that Rachel Martinez was at that party, because if it weren't for her, I might not be alive today. Rachel was a registered nurse who worked in the emergency department at the local hospital, and she was there as the girlfriend of one of Michael's co-workers. Unlike everyone else who was either ignoring me or dismissing my condition, Rachel took one look at me and immediately recognized the signs of a serious spinal injury. She pushed through the crowd of people and knelt down beside me, her professional training kicking in as she began to assess my condition. If you've ever been in a situation where one person's quick thinking saved your life, you know how crucial these moments can be. Share your story in the comments below. Rachel's first priority was stabilizing my head and neck to prevent any further damage to my spinal cord. She firmly told everyone to step back and stop trying to move me, explaining that any movement could cause permanent paralysis or even death. When my father tried to argue with her and insist that I was fine, Rachel shut him down immediately with the authority that only comes from years of medical training. She told him in no uncertain terms that I was showing clear signs of spinal trauma and that moving me could be fatal. Her calm, professional demeanor in the face of my family's chaos was like a lifeline in a storm. While Rachel was examining me and keeping me stable, she was also quietly observing the scene around her with the trained eye of someone who had seen too many accidents in the ER. She noticed the slick substance on the pool deck that everyone else had overlooked, and she could see that it wasn't just water. Rachel carefully took photos of the area with her phone, documenting the oily residue that had caused my fall. When she confronted Michael about why the deck was so slippery, his defensive reaction and inability to give a straight answer told her everything she needed to know about what had really happened. The moment that Rachel announced she was calling 911, my family's attitude shifted from dismissive to panicked. They realized that having paramedics and potentially police at the scene would mean questions, investigations, and accountability for what had happened. My mother begged Rachel to reconsider, saying it wasn't necessary and that they could handle it themselves. But Rachel stood her ground, explaining that I had clear signs of neurological damage and needed immediate emergency care. As she made that phone call, I felt the first spark of hope I'd had since hitting the concrete. Finally, someone was taking my injury seriously and fighting for my life when my own family wouldn't. The sound of sirens approaching was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard in my life. Within 12 minutes of Rachel's call, 2 paramedics and a police officer arrived at the scene, immediately taking control of the chaotic situation. The lead paramedic, a woman named Janet, worked with Rachel to carefully immobilize my spine before attempting any movement. They used a backboard and cervical collar to keep me stable, treating my injury with the seriousness it deserved from the very beginning. Meanwhile, my family stood awkwardly to the side, no longer able to dismiss or minimize what was happening to me. The police officer, Detective Williams, began asking questions about how the accident occurred while the paramedics worked on me. My family's story kept changing. First, they said I just slipped. Then they claimed I was running around the pool like a child. But Rachel stepped forward with her phone, showing the detective the photos she had taken of the oily substance on the deck. She explained that, as a nurse, She knew the difference between water and oil, and that this was clearly not an accidental spill. The detective immediately cordoned off the area and began collecting samples of the slippery substance for analysis. When Detective Williams questioned Michael about the oil on the deck, his story fell apart completely. He claimed he didn't know anything about it, then said maybe someone had spilled sunscreen, then suggested it might be from the pool maintenance chemicals. His nervous stammering and inability to give consistent answers made it clear that he was hiding something. Several party guests came forward to support Rachel's observations, saying they had also noticed how unusually slippery that area of the deck was. The detective took detailed statements from multiple witnesses, building a clear picture of negligence at minimum and possibly intentional harm. As the paramedics prepared to transport me to the hospital, Detective Williams informed my family that this was now an active investigation. He explained that causing serious bodily harm through negligence or intent was a criminal matter, and that charges could be filed depending on what the investigation revealed. My parents looked terrified, finally understanding that their dismissive attitude toward my injury could have legal consequences. Michael's face went pale as the reality hit him. His cruel prank had backfired in the worst possible way, and he was about to face the consequences for the first time in his life. The ambulance ride to the hospital was a blur of medical equipment, urgent voices, and overwhelming fear about my future. The paramedics started an IV line and constantly monitored my vital signs, while I drifted in and out of consciousness from the pain medication they had given me. I remember fragments of conversations between the medical team, words like neurological deficit, possible cord compression, and emergency surgery that sent chills through me. Every bump in the road sent shooting pain through my body, and I was terrified that I would never walk again, never have a normal life again. At the hospital, I was immediately rushed into the trauma bay where a team of doctors and nurses took over my care. Dr. Patricia Chen, the neurosurgeon on call, performed a series of tests to assess the damage to my spinal cord. She used instruments to check for sensation and reflexes in my legs and feet, documenting the complete loss of feeling below my waist. The MRI scan revealed the devastating news. I had sustained an incomplete spinal cord injury at the L1 vertebra level, with significant swelling and compression of the nerve tissue. Dr. Chen explained that without immediate surgery, the damage could become permanent and complete. The surgery lasted 6 hours, during which Dr. Chen and her team worked to decompress my spinal cord and stabilize the damaged vertebrae. They inserted metal rods and screws to hold my spine in the correct position, while the bone and soft tissue healed. When I woke up in the recovery room, the first thing I tried to do was move my toes, and felt nothing. Dr. Chen sat beside my bed and explained that while the surgery had been successful in preventing further damage, I would likely face months or years of rehabilitation. She couldn't promise that I would ever regain full function in my legs, but she emphasized that incomplete injuries sometimes allowed for partial recovery with intensive therapy. The psychological impact of the diagnosis was almost as devastating as the physical injury itself. I had gone from being an active, independent woman to someone who might never walk again, all because of my brother's malicious prank. The doctors explained that I would need to learn how to navigate the world from a wheelchair, at least initially, and that my entire life would need to be restructured around my disability. As I lay in that hospital bed, hooked up to machines and unable to feel half of my body, I realized that Michael hadn't just hurt me. He had stolen my future, my independence, and my sense of security in the world. 3 days after my surgery, Detective Williams visited me in the hospital with news that would change everything. The laboratory analysis had confirmed that the substance on the pool deck was indeed cooking oil, deliberately applied to create a slipping hazard. Security footage from a neighbor's house had captured Michael pouring the oil on the deck while I was inside the house earlier that day. Based on this evidence, along with witness statements about Michael's threatening behavior before my fall, the district attorney had decided to file criminal charges against him for aggravated assault causing serious bodily harm. The maximum sentence was 15 years in prison, and I felt a mix of relief and vindication knowing that someone would finally hold him accountable. But the charges didn't stop with Michael. My parents were also facing legal consequences for their negligent response to my injury. Detective Williams explained that their refusal to seek immediate medical attention for an obvious spinal injury constituted criminal negligence under state law. By preventing me from receiving timely medical care, they had potentially worsened my condition and endangered my life. The delay in treatment could have meant the difference between partial recovery and permanent paralysis. Their actions were so egregious that the prosecutor felt criminal charges were warranted, not just civil liability. The news of the criminal charges sent shockwaves through my extended family and my parents' social circle. People who had known them for decades couldn't believe that Thomas and Linda Johnson, the seemingly perfect couple, were facing criminal prosecution for child endangerment and negligence. My mother called me crying, begging me to ask the prosecutor to drop the charges, saying it would destroy their reputation in the community. She claimed they had just been in shock and didn't realize how serious my injury was, but I knew better. They had spent my entire childhood dismissing and minimizing my pain, and this was just the ultimate expression of their lifelong pattern of neglect. Michael's arrest made the local news, and suddenly everyone in town knew about the birthday party assault that had left a young woman paralyzed. His friends distanced themselves from him. His employer put him on unpaid leave pending the outcome of the case, and his girlfriend broke up with him. For the first time in his life, Michael was facing real consequences for his actions, and he couldn't charm or manipulate his way out of trouble. The golden child who had never been held accountable for anything was finally being forced to face justice for the years of cruelty he had inflicted on me. While the criminal case was moving through the courts, my lawyer, Jennifer Adams, was building a comprehensive civil lawsuit against my entire family. The medical bills from my surgery, hospitalization, and ongoing rehabilitation were already approaching $200,000, and that was just the beginning. I would need modifications to my home, a wheelchair-accessible vehicle, ongoing physical therapy, and possibly decades of medical care related to my spinal injury. Jennifer explained that my family was liable for all of these costs, plus damages for pain and suffering, lost wages, and the permanent impact on my quality of life. The total amount we were seeking was over $2 million. My parents' initial response to the lawsuit was typical of their lifelong pattern of avoiding responsibility. They hired an expensive defense attorney, who immediately began trying to blame me for the accident, claiming I had been drinking at the party and was therefore responsible for my own fall. They suggested that I was exaggerating the extent of my injuries and that I would probably recover completely with time. Their lawyer even had the audacity to argue that as adults, my parents had no legal duty to provide medical care for their injured daughter. It was heartbreaking to see them fight so hard to avoid taking responsibility for their role in my permanent disability. The civil discovery process revealed just how deep my family's dysfunction ran. Through depositions and document requests, we uncovered years of medical records showing that my parents had consistently failed to seek appropriate medical care for me as a child. There were incidents where I had been seriously injured and they had refused to take me to the hospital, preferring to tough it out at home. We found emails between my parents discussing how to minimize their financial exposure from my lawsuit, showing that their primary concern was protecting their assets rather than taking care of their injured daughter. The evidence painted a picture of systematic neglect and callous indifference to my well-being. Eventually, faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of a lengthy, expensive trial, my family decided to settle the lawsuit. Michael accepted a plea deal in the criminal case, pleading guilty to aggravated assault and receiving a sentence of 3 years in prison plus 5 years of probation. My parents pleaded no contest to the negligence charges and received 2 years of probation plus community service. The civil settlement provided me with enough money to cover my medical expenses and adapt to my new life, but no amount of money could give me back my mobility or erase the trauma of that day. Justice had been served, but the cost had been higher than anyone could have imagined. The rehabilitation process was the hardest thing I had ever done in my life, both physically and emotionally. I spent 4 months at a specialized spinal cord injury facility, learning how to navigate the world from a wheelchair and regaining what function I could in my legs. The physical therapy was grueling. Hours every day of exercises designed to strengthen my remaining muscles and teach my brain new pathways around the damaged areas of my spinal cord. Some days I wanted to give up, especially when the progress seemed so slow and minimal. But I was determined not to let Michael's cruelty define the rest of my life. So I pushed through every painful session and celebrated every small victory. Amazingly, after 8 months of intensive rehabilitation, I began to regain some sensation and movement in my right leg. Dr. Chen explained that my incomplete spinal cord injury had allowed for some nerve regeneration, something that doesn't happen for everyone with similar injuries. With the help of leg braces and a walker, I was eventually able to take a few steps on my own, though I still relied on my wheelchair for longer distances and daily activities. It wasn't the full recovery I had dreamed of, but it was progress that gave me hope and independence I thought I had lost forever. Every step I took felt like a victory over Michael's attempt to destroy my life. During my recovery, I discovered a new passion that would become central to my rebuilt life: spinal cord injury advocacy. I started volunteering with organizations that supported newly injured patients, sharing my story and helping others navigate the challenges I had faced. Speaking about my experience was therapeutic for me and helpful for others who were struggling with similar injuries. I eventually became a certified peer counselor and began working part-time as an advocate, fighting for better accessibility laws and support services for people with disabilities. Michael's cruelty had taken away my old life, but it had also given me a powerful purpose that I never would have discovered otherwise. If you've ever had to rebuild your life after a traumatic experience, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Your resilience might inspire someone else who needs hope. The most unexpected blessing in my new life came in the form of Thomas Rivera, the physical therapist who had worked with me throughout my rehabilitation. What started as a professional relationship slowly developed into friendship, and eventually into love. Thomas understood my journey better than anyone because he had witnessed my struggles and celebrated my victories every step of the way. 2 years after my injury, he proposed to me in the same rehabilitation gym where I had taken my first steps again, and I knew that despite everything Michael had taken from me, I had found something beautiful and real that he could never destroy. My family's betrayal had led me to this new life, and while I wouldn't wish the pain on anyone, I was grateful for the strength, purpose, and love that had emerged from the ashes of my old existence.